on train. Chapter 16. The Mean Streets. Don't you have a knapsack or small travel bag for today's journey? Ida patted her own small satchel. We shall not see our luggage again for above 12 hours. The guidebook recommends such as may be stowed under a railway seat. I would think you might at least desire to bring a hairbrush and a shaving kit. Nick only shrugged. He'd been sullen and silent since their talk yesterday. Not that she expected differently. He grew quiet when he was anxious. She babbled, of course. Or have you decided to grow a beard? He hadn't shaved since Italy. At first she had blamed it on the seasickness, but now she wondered if he were merely being lazy. He would still look handsome with the beard, certainly, but he had such a nice jawline and a particularly fine mouth. It would be a shame to obscure those things with too much facial hair. She had to admit she rather liked him in his current state. The urge to run her hands over his chin and cheeks was near overpowering. Was she still scratchy, or were the hairs just long enough to be fuzzy? How would those short whiskers feel against her skin if she were to kiss him now? Clearly, she wasn't meant to be a lady. A woman of that class would be expected to prefer her men one way or the other, rather than in some vaguely unkempt in-between state. Most people would attribute her preferences to her humble birth, daughter of a mere tradesman, aspiring to better than her station. She'd heard it often enough in the days when the scandal was fresh. Her fall from grace was to be expected, and a sign of her common roots, as though she were a lower form of human entirely. The words hurt, but Ida refused to be cowed by them. She could be just as ladylike as any member of the aristocracy. Where her actions and opinions differed, it was because she refused to make herself into someone else's idea of ideal womanhood. She could dine with the Queen and run a profitable business, thank you very much. And she could admire slightly scruffy and peculiar men if she pleased. If you've quite finished your scrutiny of my personal appearance, perhaps we might debark? Ida sprang back, allowing him passage through the door and glancing away to conceal her blush. Not that I mind being admired by a beautiful woman, Nick continued, but I must warn you, if you make a habit of staring at me, it may be taken as a sign that you actually like me, and we wouldn't want that, now would we? Oh, dear. The teasing would be the end of her. The slightest smile on his face and her heart turned to goop. I do like you, Mr. Masterson. You are grumpy every morning without fail, drink too much coffee, stay up too late, make impulsive decisions, rarely listen to reason, and always think you are right. And yet somehow you manage to be kind and funny and charming at all the right moments. You are good and caring. Even when I am furious with you, I find myself liking you. Apparently, it can't be helped. Are there no suggested remedies in your guidebook to help you dislike men you meet on a train? Sadly, no, and I understand the impudent ones to be the most difficult to rid oneself of. He grinned at her, and when he offered his arm, she took it. How long before our train departs? 2 hours. We should have time to buy a bit of food for the journey. You see, this is what comes of altering the plans. This company doesn't provide refreshments. Now we must take care with what we purchase. And don't drink the water here, it's brackish. The guide recommends pale ale and ripe oranges. Let's find some, then. For half an hour they walked the streets of Alexandria, without finding a single suitable bit of nourishment. Ida led them this way and that, navigating as best she could from the scant information in her Bradshaw's guide. Nick followed her in silence, gallantly refraining from commenting on the failure of her quest. Oh, I think if we head back in this direction... She turned and let out a yelp as a man with a knife leapt out from the shadow of a nearby doorway. Nick whirled around at her cry, letting out a sharp curse when he spied the villain. Ida flipped her parasol in front of herself like a shield, letting her guidebook tumble to the pavement. Go away! I haven't any money! She jabbed at him with the tip of the parasol, sizing him up as she did so. His features were obscured by a hooded cloak, but the tidiness of his clothes suggested he was no mere cut-purse. The man who had been tailing Nick? Or one who had been tailing her? Don't meddle where you don't belong, girlie, the man snarled, slashing with his knife. The blade sliced a long gash in the fabric of her parasol. You've been warned. A second man stepped out into the street, chuckling and leering. His hand slipped inside his coat. Ida's fingers clenched around the handle of her parasol. The sturdy shaft and stout ribs would keep the knife wielder at a distance, but this second man had a gun. Nick flew past her, a bit of metal flashing in his hand, launching himself at the second enemy. The two men crashed together just as the gun appeared, but before the villain could even lift the weapon, he toppled over, unconscious. The knife man whipped around and charged. Nick, look out! Nick spun to meet the attack, raising the small syringe that was his weapon. Ida snapped her parasol closed and swung it at the back of her enemy as he grappled with Nick. The blow hit him square in the kidneys, and he staggered. Nick jabbed him with the needle, and he joined his companion in a heap on the ground. Damnable blackguards attacking an innocent woman. I ought to... He swayed on his feet. Their eyes met for an instant, then dropped to the glittering knife handle jutting from Nick's abdomen. Oh, fuck. Ida's parasol clattered to the ground, and she seized his arm before he could fall and drive the knife further into his gut. It's not bad. Sit. She helped him to the ground. Lie back. She tore open his coat, blinking for a moment at the array of little vials sewn into the lining. Which ones are healing potions? Won't drink. Which ones? 3 on the top left. No, my left. He gritted his teeth. I'll be fine. Just a few stitches. You could get infected, and you could bleed out before we can get you to a surgeon. You need the potion. He squeezed his eyes closed. The 3rd one can be spread on the wound. Don't let me watch. She pulled out the little bottle and set it beside her. First, we need to remove the knife so I can assess the damage. She took care to grasp the handle gently, but even that slight movement caused him to flinch and cry out in pain. She gave an experimental tug, and he screamed and jerked. You must lie still. Can't hurt. You'll tear the wound more. He waved a hand at the syringe he had used on the attackers. Sleeping potion. A few drops will put me out long enough. Ida retrieved the syringe and pushed his sleeve up enough to poke the needle into his arm. Not too much. Don't want to leave you... She depressed the plunger for only a second, and he slumped into unconsciousness. One firm tug freed the knife and started a gush of blood. She peeled back his waistcoat and shirt, mopping up the blood with her handkerchief to allow her to inspect the wound. Narrow, but deep. Pouring the healing potion over it would heal the surface, but damage and potential infection could remain underneath. She needed to get the potion inside to heal him properly. Her eyes fell to the syringe. She hopped up and jabbed both their attackers with it again, expending all the remaining sleeping potion. Then she refilled it with the healing potion. Working as methodically as she dared, she pumped small amounts of potion deep into the wound, edging her way back out until the entire gash had been coated with the pale pink liquid. She spread the last bit over the top of the wound, watching the flesh begin to knit together as the magic took effect. She exhaled in relief. He would live. The potion would continue to mend the damage, and if he showed any signs of ill health as the day wore on, she would use another on him, even if she had to pour it down his throat. Nick! She gripped his shoulder and shook gently, trying to rouse him. Nick, can you wake up? He didn't so much as twitch. She had no idea how much of the sleeping potion she'd shot into him, but she couldn't sit around waiting for it to wear off. Not in a strange city where they had already been set upon once. She made a quick check of their assailants. Neither carried any identifying papers. They looked like local men, but not street criminals. Mercenaries, she suspected. Hired thugs. But hired by whom? Ida tidied Nick up as best she could, then fetched her damaged parasol and her guidebook. She opened the slim volume and flipped to the page that listed the address of the British consulate. She would drag him there, if necessary. And I will see you tomorrow for the next chapter.